Euzubillahimineşşeytanirracim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Rabbi şrah li sadri ve yessir li emri ve hlul ukdeten min lisani yefkahu kavli. Selamun aleyküm ve rahmetullahi ve berekatuh. Inshallah everyone is doing great. We will continue with the fifth flash of 22nd word, second station. But before starting the fifth flash, I guess there are a few short paragraphs at the end of the fourth flash, which kind of gives the summary of what has been discussed so far. So let's start reading these paragraphs, the fifth sentences, and then continue with the fifth flash, inshallah. Is it okay, everyone? Yusuf, would you like to read this part, and if you think there's a need for discussion, we can discuss, otherwise we can just continue with the fifth flash.
Okay. Furthermore, this situation shows that its sustainer is in need of nothing, nor does anything diminish his treasury, and nor is anything at all difficult for his power. This, then, is a sort of seal of eternal besoutedness. Thus, on every living being are a seal of divine oneness and the stamp of eternal besoutedness. Yes, through the tongue of its life, every living being recites, "Say He is God, the One, the eternally besought. Qul huwa Allahu ahad, Allahu samad." In addition to these two seals are several more important windows, but since they have been explained in detail in other places, our discussion here has been brief. Seeing that each particle in existence at once opens up three windows and two openings onto the unity of the necessarily existent, and life too opens two doors, you can compare how all the levels of beings from particles to the sun spread the light of knowledge of the all-glorious one. Thus, you can understand from this the degrees of progress in knowledge of God and the levels of awareness of His presence. So this one was the summary of fourth flash. In fourth flash, he talked about three windows that from each particle, three windows open up to divine oneness. Then, looking at life, he talked about two openings. From each particle again, two openings onto the unity of the necessarily existent one. And then from life, he opened up two doors, or he showed us two doors to, again, divine oneness and eternal besoutedness. And at the end, he is saying that this is an indication that there are so many levels in understanding oneness of the Creator, divine oneness, and awareness of His presence. Awareness of His presence, I guess, in here refers to, since every particle with various aspects declaring their witnessing to the divine oneness. So as much as I am aware of it, it gives me the divine presence. It is pretty much like when you go to, let's say, a mosque in the Eid prayer. That it takes you into some sort of an atmosphere that you taste once or twice a year, because everybody around you is consciously saying Allahu Akbar, for instance. So it gives you some sort of a presence. So I guess this is what, as much as I see that all the particles also declare the same witnessing, same consciousness, then I will, to that extent, it's possible for me to feel that presence.
Any other comments? Dr. Rahman, you can share your questions if no one else wants to say something.
I have nothing to say.
Okay. No comments? Okay, let's continue with the fifth flash, inshallah.
Fifth flash. If a book is handwritten and in the form of a letter, a single pen is sufficient to write it. While if it is printed, pens, that is pieces of print, are necessary to the number of the book's letters so that it can be printed and come into existence. I need to read that again. If a book is handwritten and in the form of a letter, a single pen is sufficient to write it. While if it is printed, pens, that is pieces of print, are necessary to the number of the book's letters so that it can be printed and come into existence. If most of the book is written in an extremely fine script within some of its letters, like Surah Yasin, being written within the letters Ya, Sin, then for it to be printed, all the small pieces of print are necessary for those single letters. Similarly, if you say the book of the universe is the writing of the pen of power of the eternally besought one and the missive of the single and unique one, you travel a reasonable road so easy as to be necessary. But if you attribute it to nature and causes, you travel a road so difficult as to be impossible, and so full of superstition and delusion as to be unacceptable. For then there would have to be present in every bit of earth and every drop of water and every piece of air millions of metal printing presses and innumerable immaterial factories, which could fashion and form the countless numbers of flowering and fruit-bearing plants. Otherwise, one has to accept that they possess all-encompassing knowledge and power over all things, so that they could be the true source of those creatures. For every piece of earth, water and air can be the source of most plants. However, plants, whether flowering or fruit-bearing, are formed in so well-ordered and balanced a fashion, and are so distinctive and different from one another, that a different immaterial factory or different printing press would be necessary for each. That means, if nature ceases being a pattern and becomes the source, it necessitates that everything contains the machines to make everything else. Nature worship is therefore based on an idea so superstitious that even those who subscribe to it are ashamed of it. See the infinitely delirious unreason of the misguided who suppose themselves to be intelligent and take a lesson. In short, all the letters of a book describe themselves to the extent of a letter and point to their own existence in one way, while they describe their writer with 10 words and show him in many ways. For example, the one who wrote me has fine handwriting, his pen is red, and so on. In just the same way, all the letters of the mighty book of the universe point to themselves to the extent of their own size and physical beings, but describe the names of the pre-eternal inscriber like odes, and testify to the one they signify, and point to his names with fingers to the number of their attributes. That means that even if one denies both oneself and the universe like the foolish sophist, one still should not deny the all-glorious Maker.
Jazakallah. Anyone who wants to
I have
take
a
the lead?
question.
Yeah,
I don't
please.
want to take the lead, but I have a question. Can someone break down the,
First paragraph.
yeah, it's a little confusing.
So the way I understand, he's talking about these letters, the mold. You wouldn't say mold. What is it? Like
Covered
mold. Okay, the letters they use in printing houses or pressing houses. Printing press, you said? Yes. Like to print a page, you order all these tiny letters, metals, and then you press the page like 1,000th time. So this is how at least old printing machines work. So you order each letter. So in other words, you need all these letters individually to order them. So he's talking about that, I guess. And he also says, now assume within each letter, there's a paragraph written. Like think of, he says Yasin. Think of the letter Ya, and within Ya, you write some text. You just make it a fancy way, just like a piece of art. You put a letter, and inside the letter you write the everything, the paragraph. So he says, then you need all these tiny letters as well. So you would need one letter for ya, and these tiny letters to fill this letter ya. I don't know if it was clear or not.
In calligraphy, right?
Exactly.
Right.
I think of a calligraphic letter, but inside the letters there's a text. You write a tiny text within the letter. So he says, to write a book in this way, you need to put all these letters, tiny letters, in the printing machine. But he says, if it is handwritten, all you need is just a pen. If you want to write something new, for instance, you don't have to change anything. You continue writing with your single pen. But if you want to change the page with a printing machine, you have to take off all the letters, put some new letters, so that you will press with these new sets of letters.
That makes sense. I get it, but is it still applicable as an example if we consider like current?
Oh, current printing printers.
Yeah, I mean, or else I understand the analogy for what it's trying to explain.
I guess you have to, I think he's not talking about the printers. So it wouldn't, at least to me, it wouldn't make sense talking about like different technologies or different ways of printing. He's just saying, if you want to give a source of existence to every tiny piece, you have to deal with so many pieces. That's what I understand from the analogy. I'm assuming that if he lived in this age, he wouldn't give printer example, he would give another example. Any comments, questions?
I guess it seems like he was making a very similar point in the fourth flash as well. I mean, I'm wondering, I guess we could go through it, but...
So maybe one part which is missing in the fourth flash, I just know it in a summary form. I was not here last week, sorry. But now I guess one tiny difference, maybe actually it's a big difference, is that the book of universe being written constantly. I don't know if it was in the fourth flash. And one things about the differences between flashes. A few days ago, I was watching a talk from a very influential person, a yogi, as they call, like the people who make yoga. They call them yogi. I assume he's very influential around the world. He was part of the United Nations panel. So he was giving a speech. And interesting, he was saying almost exactly the same things, that how all these tiny particles taking place, all these different machineries, how things are related to each other and so on, almost same sentences. It was very surprising, except the part he said, therefore, there's this source of existence in every single particle. Like, the description of the reality was same, but the conclusion was just the opposite. Here we say, we see such a creation, therefore you have to come to the conclusion that there is one God, otherwise it would be absurd, that you have to attribute godness to every particle. And he was so happily saying that therefore we should attribute godness to every particle. So he didn't say God, but he said the source of existing, a source of creation, a creative power in every particle. So human being can be liberated, so on and so forth. Like we can get rid of the God because creation is already, like creative power is already in every particle. So it was, I don't know, educating for me. People were so happy, the audience. I guess, I don't know, like, I'm just trying to understand maybe from a psychological perspective that saying that you don't need God, at first, I guess it sounds liberating, because you don't have to worry about an authority. But once you think about the consequences that every a single particle having its source of creation, therefore has to be obeyed, I guess it becomes the opposite of the liberation. Anyway.
I think that's interesting in the respect that there may be the human desire for everything around us to be divine in a sense, right? And divine in the sense of meaningful. So, you know, by attributing a creative power to each particle, there's almost a sense that like, oh, each part, there's something special about everything, you know, like I'm interacting with something meaningful. So I think maybe the desire for that or the happiness that comes with such a conclusion is not something foreign. There is that need. It's just about how you go about it, I guess. You know, I think there's still truth in that sort of, like a symbol, indication of truth in that sort of belief or conclusion as well.
No, I too, like, I agree. Like, I was also listening it as a, you know, the way of verifying, you know, the way I see the creation. So it seems to me like whether people are atheists, whether people are, I don't know, all these different ideologies, the way we see the universe is not changing that much. So we all see the same qualities, similar qualities in the universe. So even a yogi wouldn't deny this perfectly intermingled particles. A particle taking roles in my body or your body or an animal's body, same particle, doing all these different jobs. It was so like entertaining, but because he was giving exactly the same example. Like he was saying, he was saying like you eat a mango, it becomes part of you, and then cow, it's a mango, I don't know if it's mango, and then it becomes the part of the cow, the same mango. It does all these different things in different bodies, but same mango. Similar example, like almost written by Nursi. So the description, the way we see the universe is same. I guess naked eye can see the truth in a descriptive way. But then what do you make? What you make out of this description? I guess it's the difference. First, please go ahead. I see your mic is open. Oh, okay, I guess it was a mistake. Otherwise, please go ahead if you want to talk. I cannot hear. I don't know if anyone else can hear Faraz. Oh, we cannot hear you, Faraz. Sorry. And then he's gone. Please go ahead. No problem.
I just want to comment about the yogi. It's just his argument makes no sense because
Yogi is not here.
Okay. It's completely imaginary. Like it's just in his imagination. It has no evidence because he's saying everywhere you see this godlike manifestation, it's so perfect everywhere. And then he's saying, so everything is now godlike? If everything is godlike, and if it all shows like it's acting in the same way, then it shows that the source is one. There can only be one. There's only one. They're not different. They're not acting in different ways. The fact that they're so connected, it's like seeing sunlight. If sunlight hits at like everywhere, and then I look at one little point, I'm not going to say the sunlight there is the sun. I guess is the example of water droplets. But if I see everywhere there's sunlight, then the conclusion is that there's one source. I don't look at this. I feel like you need to have a very biased view to look at this and then come to the conclusion that it actually points that everything itself is the light. Like, it's just, I'm surprised that I'm saying this, but it's just very bad reasoning. Very bad reasoning.
Why you are surprised?
Because I did it.
So, I don't know, like, I'm really not concerned about whether his logic was valid or not. To me, the important part is we, like a people, they see same thing and they talk about the same thing in different ways. Even with, even with someone who denies like everything you say, if you talk to someone, you would realize that you're talking about the same qualities. Like, for instance, infinite something. You're both talking about eternity. You're both talking about perfection and so on. But you put these qualities in different part of the equation, into different part of the equation. So, again, to me, what is important is the way I see the reality is that, just made up. Even someone who making fun of religion, he or she has to use the same description, start from the same description. That's what I was, more concerned or interested. Asim, I saw you raising your hand.
Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, while I was listening to the comments about Aisha Noor's comment about the everything, like the desire of human beings for everything to have, this, she called it divine. That's usage of the word divine. I think what you're referring to about the philosophy where this particular, I think I may have heard this also, is getting very popular these days. But there are 2 points that I couldn't really, I was like noticing that that didn't make sense to me, or that was not meant at all, or that was pretty much avoided. Although, like you were giving the example of the mango, and the mango, becomes part of you. Yeah, so there's this notion is there. But the weakness in this particular example was, or this particular wise man, I would say. So there's this particular, discussion, or the way this philosophy is coming from a very well-known wise man also. I've heard him several times. And so one thing I noticed was there was no point about the source of existence. So everything that is mentioned, all the things that, the consciousness, universal consciousness, as is called in that philosophy, but there is no source of existence. Where is that all coming from? So that's one thing, right? And again, everything that how the things become part of you gains all the qualities. You are basically becoming like how you become a universal kind of being. So how even that whole system, how is that again being facilitated and coming? How do you explain that happening? Is it magic, or just happening by chance, or by just you have all those abilities to get all the different be part of this whole universality by the food that you eat, and it becomes part of you. All the particles become you in a sense. So that those two things I was thinking was like the focus, where at least that's where the prophethood comes in. That makes a big distinction in terms of the wise man saying versus what the prophet is teaching. So that was something that that came to my mind also, where not the claim that the prophet is making is that nothing is from the beings themselves. So there is definitely his message is inclusive of there being a source of existence. So the key is this, going to the source. What is the source of existence in that scenario? So that's what I wanted to highlight a little bit.
Jazakallah. If there are no other comments, we can continue with the second paragraph, reading the paragraph. Similarly, if you say the book of universe is the writing of the pen of power of the eternal beside one, and the missile of the single and the unique one, you travel a reasonable road so easy as to be necessary. But if you attribute it to nature and causes, you travel a road so difficult as to be impossible, and so full of superstition and delusion as to be unacceptable. For then there would have to be present in every bit of earth and every drop of water and every piece of air millions of metal printing presses. Millions of metal printing presses, these metal letters. And innumerable immaterial factories which could fashion and form the countless numbers of flowering and fruit-bearing plants. Otherwise, one has to accept that they possess all-encompassing knowledge and power over all things, so that they could be the true source of those creatures. Otherwise, one has to accept that they possess all-encompassing knowledge and power over all things, so that they could be the true source of those creatures. Yeah, this is exactly what he was saying. There would have to be present in every bit of earth and every drop of water and every piece of air millions of metal printing presses and innumerable immaterial factories. For every piece of earth, water and air can be the source of most plants. For every piece of earth, water and air can be the source of most plants. However, plants, whether flowering or fruit-bearing, are formed in so well-ordered and balanced a fashion, and are so distinctive and different from one another, that a different immaterial factory or different printing press would be necessary for each. It goes like that. So I assume we already studied very similar parts in fourth flash. That means if nature ceases being a pattern and becomes the source, it necessitates that everything contains the machines to make everything else. Nature worship is therefore based on an idea so superstitious that even those who subscribe to it are ashamed of it. See the infinitely delirious unreason of the misguided, who suppose themselves to be intelligent, and take a lesson.
I'm trying to see, this is very much similar to the third window in the fourth flash. In the third window, he was giving the example of a flower pot. He was saying that you fill a flower pot with some earth, which is composed of particles and is the means of growth of any flowering or fruit-bearing plant. So, and in there he was making a point saying that then you are imagining as if that there are innumerable factories in each flower pot, because as if, and while we were studying it, we said that as if you put this program of the seed into that compact disk reader, as if, and it processes and it produces you a different product. And at least in theory, you know that whatever sort of seed you put into this flower pot, you believe as if you see it, that it's going to come up as a vegetable at some point, a plant. So what is different? What different is he saying in this fifth flash? So I guess in general, first let's start from the beginning. He is making a distinction again between either a hand writing something or a predefined machine that does it. The mindset behind the other idea is we want to eliminate somebody making a choice and things coming into being by a choice. And maybe we should underline this, because once I remember having this conversation with a friend, I was saying that what do you observe in existence? He said he observes knowledge, he observes power. I said, how about will? There is constant choices that are being made. He said, what choice? There's no choice that is being made. I guess this part is especially being mentioned in here, because at every moment, like every different flower is a different thing. So our idea is no decision is needed to be made, because as if the machinery is already there and it is just going through, no choice is being made. And this is the idea behind this printing press. It's already laid out, everything is in there already, so you don't need to make any choice, it just keeps printing. And the author is saying that if this is your mindset, no choice is needed to be made, then wherever you observe some sort of a thing coming into existence, and if it's a thing other than another thing, for the number of things that are possible, there needs to be this much of I would say knowledge, but knowledge in terms of, like, since he is, by putting that it's a printing press, he says knowledge sounds very abstract in this case. In fact, what your meaning is, there's a material but immaterial sort of a being which does the job in there. Because in this second paragraph, he provided two options. He said either there is such a machinery, like a factory or machinery in every being, or you need to assume that it has an all-encompassing knowledge. Even if you are going to, because this is the second option, all-encompassing knowledge. So you need to say that there's a decision-making agent in every single particle, or every particle is such a system that knows, or the knowledge is encoded in it, because no decision is supposed to be made in the first case. So today, if you would like to call it a computer instead of a printer, like printing press, so in a computer, you would need to say that, well, a computer is simply, you can make computers out of water as well. I mean, it doesn't necessarily need to be some electronic device. It can be as long as it flows, anything that flows, like you can make a computer of water. And if you look at this computer, you would say that, well, just water is flowing and you made the machinery so that it gives this output. Otherwise, it will give that other output. So then he says such a thing needs to be everywhere. And in every nested component, you will need to have, you need to imagine such a computer, like a computer to design Birkan as Birkan, but also cells of Birkan, which are pretty much like Birkan again, like the letter Ya and Sin, and the entire chapter being written inside it. So it has to have this nested knowledge in everywhere. This sort of a thing that is being imagined in here, he says. So I'm assuming that if Nursi was alive today, most likely he's going to give a computer instead of a printing press in here.
Any other guesses about what he would give? Should we continue? In short, all the letters of a book describe themselves to the extent of a letter. All the letters of a book describes themselves to the extent of a letter and point to their own existence in one way, while they describe their writer with 10 words and show him in many ways. So when you look at a letter, it talks about itself in just one way. It's the letter A. But it says it talks about his writer in several, like multiple ways. For example, the one who wrote me has fine handwriting. His pen is red, and so on. Somebody wrote him something, I guess, and he's looking at the writings. He says, whoever wrote me, he has fine handwriting. His pen is red, and so on. In just the same way, all the letters of the mighty book of the universe point to themselves to the extent of their own size and physical beings, but describe the names of the pre-eternal inscriber like odes and testify to the one they signify and point to his names with fingers to the number of their attributes. That means that even if one denies both oneself and the universe, like the foolish sophists, even if you deny yourself and the universe, you still have to deny, you cannot deny the all-glorious Maker, he says. So it is possible that just because I was in Turkey, so I was far from English for a while, but I'm having difficulty understanding the paragraph. So if anyone can help me, I would appreciate it.
I can. Oh.
Please go ahead.
Please go ahead.
Okay.
Okay, you go.
No, you were about to speak first.
I was just gonna, my take on it is that, just if I have a handwritten letter, that letter tells me so much about the one that wrote it. Maybe the way that, if they're addressing me, the way they write my name, or if they doodled on it, or just even the way they sign their name, the way they make their Ys. It tells, something about their personality. If they're like me, it won't be neat at all, and it'll be just kind of scribbly. Or if they're really artistic, it'll maybe have like more calligraphic style to it. So just, every single part of that letter, I think it's kind of beautiful how it says it is like an ode, in that it tells me something, maybe a story. It tells me something about the one writing it. And so if I see, everything that exists around me as I would a handwritten letter, even though everything around me is much more dynamic and continuously changing and whatnot, then everything becomes an opportunity for me to acquaint myself with its source. But I mean, I don't know, I really like the word ode. In just the same way, all the letters of the mighty book of the universe point to themselves to the extent of their own size and physical beings, but describe the names of the pre-eternal inscriber like odes. Everything is just there for me to interpret and also connect myself with as well, because in every ode, even if it's about something else, there's something about it that speaks to you as well. And as many qualities as there is in a single letter, so if it's size or shape, that's as many qualities it tells me about its writer. That's what I just wanted to say one other thing. about the paragraph before it, just backtracking a little bit, I thought it was interesting how, in the last two sentences, he says, nature worship is therefore based on an idea so superstitious that even those who subscribe to it are ashamed of it. I think it's interesting that, in a way, he's also subtly defining what worship is, and saying that, interpreting the universe in this way means that interpretation itself is worship. That what you're doing in that moment by attributing such qualities is worshiping those qualities in and of themselves. So I just thought it was interesting that he says specifically nature worship. Even though, I haven't been able to really see for myself that those who subscribe to it aren't necessarily ashamed of it. It seems like they're quite proud of it to the extent that it's talked about.
Suhail, I guess you want to speak. Go ahead, please.
I just wanted to add in that to what Aisha was saying that, if you look at a tree, the tree in and of itself tells you so much. As he says, all the letters of the mighty book of the universe point to themselves to the extent of their own size and physical beings. So in other words, a tree can only tell you so much. It can only tell you its shape, its size, the number of, as much as you investigate it, the nature of its roots, trunk, branches, leaves, what fruit it bears, or another. That really what I'm trying to say is that whatever you can extract from it in terms of how it is already within it. The knowledge of what a tree is, the rules that govern its existence. That's all it tells you, really. Just like if somebody wrote a letter, you can just say, oh, this person writes in this way. He used red ink, as he says, has fine handwriting. Okay. But, as he says, they describe the names of the pre-eternal inscriber like odes, and testify to the one they signify, and point to his names with finger to the number of their attributes. In other words, what I think he's saying is that like every sort of aspect of a tree, for example, maybe its fruit or its branches or its leaves, its trunk, its roots, the chemical processes taking place, they all point in each of them in innumerable ways, each one of those things, to different names of his. So a fruit may point to mercy or compassion or fashioning or fashioner or justice or beauty in a way unique to that particular, let's say it's an apple tree, an apple, versus a branch that points to those names and other names in its own way. But as he says, they point in sort of innumerable ways that go beyond the tree itself and look to absolute or an absolute source. So whereas the tree was sort of confined to what a tree is, it can only tell you what a tree is. A tree can only tell you what it is when you investigate it. But it tells you something about absolute if you look to its writer, as he says, the one who inscribes odes. So that's why he says, even if you're foolish enough to deny oneself your own existence or the universe's existence, like some people do, like if they ask, is anything real? Okay, you can do that, but then you can't deny the realest thing there is, and that's the all-glorious maker, who must be absolute. That's the realest thing there is. Okay, it's great you deny a tree's existence. You question if it's even real. You question if anything's real. if anything even means anything, or everything is meaningless. But you can't deny the realest thing that exists, and that's absolute.
Another comment? So should we continue with the sixth flash then?
It's interesting. Still, I'm trying to wrap my head around why author is giving this printing press. But yes, we are truly, I mean, I might repeat myself, but we are really trying to avoid somebody making a choice. And author is showing the absurdity in this by saying that then whatever you call a thing, call it a particle or whatever, call it a spirit, a thing, each thing has to have this machinery, and machinery in here being an agent which does things without a chooser. Then everything has to have this machinery of the whole existence. I mean, it sounds very absurd for sure. This is what he says, and it doesn't make sense. And this is what he says, it doesn't make sense. But this is what it boils down to. Such an absurdity. I mean, if you avoid saying that somebody is making this choice, I mean, this choice is being done in a real-time fashion, because every single one of them is unique as well. So he says, then you are, in fact, imagining a thing, a deterministic machine, everywhere, innumerable deterministic machines within themselves, which are acting. This is what it boils down to. I guess Yogi was smarter at least. Stupid and sort of than what you're made in every single entity. But still it's a huge impossibility, a lot of like folded, nested impossibilities. But the yogi is not denying, at least the way we are now hearing, that the choice is being made. But if you would like to avoid this, then it's even much more absurd. It doesn't make any sense.
Instead of saying a choice is being made, can we just say a will is being manifested?
Yeah. Will is being manifested. So.
Because as long as you are aware that what you are describing is your perception, so you can escape from like a danger of saying something stupid. Like choice being made, I mean, if you're talking about the choice as you observe, then I guess there wouldn't be that much difference between choice being made and will being manifest. But when you say choice being made, if you're talking about like someone is making choice, imagining something like that, then yes, the problem starts, I guess.
Practically speaking, what it means is, let's say if this light photons are coming from this light,
very practical.
and if there was a glass here, like the photons are going to be reflected or refracted, or both at the same time. But there will be a certain angle. So this sort of the idea that's being made in here is, it is all like machinery. The light comes and it goes in a certain angle. No choice is being made, as if it is very much determined, written over rock. So like a factory, it just works. This is what happens. But if you see it as, no, that there is this photon coming and it's going in a certain way, no matter for how many billions of years it's being done in the same way, each and every time this photon, when it hits the glass, a new interaction, a new refraction, reflection, some choice. Because it can go this way or it can go that way. A choice is being made, or a will is being manifest, however you would like to take it. This is one way. The other way to take it is, no, it is a machinery working in there. So now the author is saying that this glass can become something else. It can become, I don't know, part of a different body and it's going to behave in a different way. So in theory, this glass can become anything. So this anything that you observe in this existence needs to be decided in the same way, or manufactured. In this case, it's not decision anymore, manufactured in the same way. So this is what we're imagining. The whole universe, machinery to run the whole universe needs to be within this smallest thing as well, if you want to avoid this decision being made.
And just to add on to that, if I think about it in terms of it being more machine-like, right, it almost attains like a impersonal quality to it in terms of its relation to me. It's just like this indifferent machine-like process that doesn't really know me or my feelings or my state of being. But if it's a will, right, which points to a conscious being, then, you know, just going back to, I'm going to bring it back to the ode, then there's that immediate dynamic relationship between whatever is being manifested in front of me and me, because it doesn't exist separate or isolated from me, but in terms of my existence, I'm experiencing it specifically. It's being shown to me, rather, perhaps, right, or manifested within my scope of experience specifically for me. I mean, it's completely personal then. It's completely related to me and my life and my state of being and my feelings and emotions and whatnot. And I was just thinking as Sohail was talking, I started thinking about the Matrix. And, you know, if we think about, like, you know how, like, in the Matrix, all the codes are, like, let's go back to the tree, right? The tree is actually just a bunch of green codes. We can think of it in that term, except that it's just like this dynamic poem that's being written in the form of a tree, that I can continuously extract something meaningful from. And it's being written specifically for me in that very moment. Then it makes you feel like a guest of honor in a sense, because it's just like, wow, you know, these constant, like, poems being written to me from my creator, telling me something that's related to me and important for my existence. Mm-hmm. Then that also forces me to take seriously every experience that I have, rather than dismiss it as habitual or routine-like in a sense, or natural.
Should we move on? Anyone from our online participants has any comment with the fifth flash or anything before that? Okay, let's continue with the sixth flash. Then now it's your turn, Ashana, I guess.
We have other faces. Yeah. Right.
Where? Would you like to read it, Abdurrahman, first?
I think she's about to read it. No?
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Sixth flash. Just as the all-glorious Creator has placed on the heads of all his beings and on the foreheads of all his creatures the seals of his oneness, some of which you have seen in the previous flashes, so in brilliant fashion has he placed many stamps of oneness on all species and numerous seals of unity on all universals, as well as the various stamps of unity on the world as a whole. Of those many seals and stamps, we shall point out one on the page of the face of the earth in the springtime. It is like this. The pre-eternal inscribers raising to life in the spring and summer at least 300,000 species of plants and animals with complete distinction and differentiation and total order and separation amid infinite intermingling and confusion, is a stamp of divine unity as clear and brilliant as the spring itself. Yes, anyone with an iota of consciousness will understand that to create with perfect order while rising to life of the dead earth in the spring, 300,000 samples of the resurrection of the dead, and to write without fault, error, mistake, or deficiency, in most well-balanced, well-proportioned, well-ordered, and perfect fashion, the individual members of 300,000 different species, one within the other, on the face of the earth, is a seal particular to an all-glorious one, an all-powerful one of perfection, an all-wise one of beauty, possessing infinite power, all-encompassing knowledge, and a will capable of governing the whole universe. The all-wise Quran decrees, so look to the signs of God's mercy, how He raises to life the earth after its death. It is who will raise the dead to life, for He is powerful over all things. Quran chapter 30, verse 50. Yes, it is surely easy for the creative power which, within a few days, demonstrates examples of 300,000 resurrections and raising the earth to life, to raise men to life. For example, could it be said to a displayer of miracles who at a sign will remove the mountains of Gedincik and Subhan, are you able to remove from this valley this huge rock which is blocking our path? Similarly, can it be said in a way that infers doubt to an all-wise and powerful one, an all-glorious and all generous and compassionate one, who created the sky and the mountains and the earth in 6 days and continuously fills and empties them? Can you remove from us this layer of earth which was prepared and laid out in eternity and is blocking our way to your banquet? Can you level the earth and let us pass on? You observed a seal of divine unity on the face of the earth in the summertime. Now look, a stamp of unity is clearly obvious on the vast, wise, and perspicacious disposals of the spring on the face of the earth. For that activity is on an absolutely vast scale, and the vastness is together with an absolute speed. And that speed is together with an absolute munificence, and together with these an absolute order and perfect beauty of art and exquisiteness of creation are apparent. These form a seal which could belong only to one possessing infinite knowledge and boundless power. Yes, we see that on the earth within an absolute extensiveness are a creation, disposal, and activity which are on an absolutely vast scale. And these are occurring within that vast scope with absolute speed. And together with that speed and vast scope, an absolute munificence is apparent in the multiplication of individual beings. And together with that munificence, vast scope, and speed, an absolute ease is apparent. And to create the absolute order and exceptional beauty of art to be seen in all species and individuals, and the perfect differentiation within infinite intermingling, and the valuable works within extreme abundance, and the complete correspondence on an extensive scale, and the artistic marvels with the greatest ease, and to demonstrate a wondrous art and miraculous activity at one moment, everywhere, in the same fashion, in every individual, together with that munificence, ease, speed, and vast scope, is certainly and without doubt the stamp of one who, although he is nowhere, is all present and all seeing everywhere. Nothing is hidden from him, nor is anything difficult for him. Particles and stars are equal in relation to his power. For example, in a garden of that all-glorious and compassionate one's munificence, I counted the bunches hanging from a grapevine of the thickness of 2 fingers, which I saw to be like one little pip among the bunches of his miracles. There were 155. I counted the grapes in one bunch. There were around 120. I thought, if this vine was a tap from which flowed honeyed water, and it produced water continuously, it would only just be enough for the bunches which, in the face of this heat, suckled those hundreds of little pumps of the sherbet of mercy. However, it only occasionally obtains a little moisture. The one who does this, then, must surely be powerful over all things. Glory be to him at whose art minds are bewildered.
Jazakallah khair. Would you like to also lead the discussion? Okay, sixth flash. At the very beginning, I will just read the first sentence. I like that for a reason. Just as the all-glorious Creator has placed on the heads of all his beings and on the foreheads of all his creatures the seals of his oneness. So I guess it's like a kind of interpretation of the verse. There is not a moving creature, but he has grasp of its forelock. Verily, it is my sustainer that it's on a straight path. I really like this. Like when you look at the foreheads of all the creatures, he says, you will see his seal. In another way, there's no creature that he doesn't have a grasp of if forelock. And then he continues with this example of spring, how everything is brought to life out of death, and then the order in it and the perfection in it. So one question, he says 300,000 samples of the resurrection of the dead, and to write without fault, error, mistake, or deficiency. Writing without fault, error, mistake, or deficiency in most well-balanced, well-proportionate, well-ordered, and perfect fashion. So he talks about these error-freeness, like being free from errors, mistakes, or deficiency, being perfect, well-balanced, and so on. How should we understand this part? Like things being perfect or well-ordered or without any error or mistake? Like what kind of order he's talking about, at what level?
Would a mistake be like you create an insect that now can't survive in an environment?
There are such
like
insects.
That can't survive?
Yes,
they just, then how do they exist?
They're born and then die. Because, for instance, they cannot suck the whatever they suck.
How are they born?
What do you mean how they're born? Now, if you're asking whether, whether there are creatures or not who cannot, let's say, live as expected, whatever expectation is, and yeah, we see such creatures, right? There are children who cannot hear, who cannot see, who cannot eat, who cannot breathe.
For me, that would be a mistake, yeah. That's my definition that I need to change, I guess.
Maybe you don't. I mean, especially like, studying all these disorders. Like by definition, I'm studying, if you look from the way that you described, like I'm studying people who are created in a mistaken way, let's say.
For like children with disorders, let's say, but then, yeah, the children have disorders, but then you have extremely loving parents that take care of that child, and then the child isn't just like thrown out into the street, usually, I guess.
It is even possible.
It's possible.
Yeah.
Okay.
So is it that in the sixth flash, he's talking about a stamp over species in springtime? So, for example, he is saying that humankind is a species, so humankind is being resurrected, or plums are another species. So what you're talking about is a plum, maybe out of a plum tree which has, let's say, hundreds of plums, and we are talking about one of the plums which might be like mistaken, quote unquote. In general, in this part, he's talking about the plums in general, plum tree, whatever. So he's talking about the big picture of things coming into being and trying to show us the stamp over there. Previously, he talked about some like particles. So the individuals he already talked about saying, so it was one end of the spectrum. Now we are coming to another end of the spectrum, which is in the vastness, in a larger scale. He's showing us the stem. And for example, if we say flies, yeah, flies have been resurrected in the spring in the northern hemisphere properly. Yes, there had been some cases of flies which were like diseased, whatever. I guess it needs to be studied separately, but in general, flies coming into being, or the plums coming into being, mangoes coming into being. So looking all of these and seeing that they come within an order also being, for instance, in springtime, we say, oh, now this week is the time for the purple flowers. And really purple flowers open up that week during the spring. So we do observe this order within the existence, but maybe in one of the branches in front of your house, which was supposed to give the purple flower, yeah, all the rest of the branches do give purple flower, but this one branch, which is not resurrected, let's say then the death is being manifested in there in terms of resurrection, you do not see that purple flower anymore. So I guess in here, the thing to focus on is in the larger scale to see what is being manifested in the vast scale of species.
But aren't we trying to find signatures at the small scale?
So since the beginning, the premise was to say that the Creator is visible everywhere. And now it's like in the fifth flesh, as he was giving the example of a artwork of Yasin, the chapter is within the letter. So far, especially the fourth flesh, let's say, he was showing us these stamps in every single letter of the chapter Yasin. But now, as if in the sixth flesh, he's talking about the letter Ya and Sin in a larger scale. So, because since the existence is nested, so sometimes we go in smaller scale, sometimes we come out and see it in the larger scale, we do observe the same manifestation. Because if we see the manifestation in every individual, this shouldn't mean that I'm not going to see the manifestation in the species of people. Because it is a separate manifestation. I mean, it's not that, like giving the example of an army. In the army, every soldier is taking making a certain behavior and pattern so that you observe the order within the army. But looking at the soldier only, I do not see the big picture of what's going on in the, let's say, 10 soldiers, 100 soldiers, 1,000 soldiers, and the entire army. So I guess in here now he is zooming out and showing that there is another stamp in every species, which is not visible to you when you look at it in the individual. There is a distinct stamp in this outer level as well.
So in the big picture, there's no mistake? Is that the argument?
So in the big picture, you see a pattern, and this is what he is saying, yes.
What can you tell me what you mean by mistake? Like, what is defined as a mistake?
So
what would be a mistake in the big picture right now?
So if, for example, if it was the case that I do observe, let's say, I don't know what will happen next year. If I was not expecting such a thing, if it was totally unknown for me, I wouldn't be seeing any order, for instance. This would be lack of order. So I would call it orderless. But I have a definition of what an orderly existence would look like. That's why I expect purple flowers in the certain time period. And I guess talking about the, let's say, if the purple flowers are, I guess it would be like purple flowers come out as orange would be a mistake. So if this is what you would call as a mistake, I don't know about the mistake part of it.
So at the beginning, Suhail is asking for like raising his hand. I will give the mic to you, Suhail, just a moment. At the beginning of the paragraph, he says, pre-eternal inscribers rising to life in spring and summer, at least 300,000 species. He's raising all these different species, he says, of plants and animals with complete distinction and differentiation and total order and separation amid infinite intermingling and confusion. Is a stamp of divine unity, he says. So the order with respect to the relationship between these species. So you see that from a donkey comes a donkey. From a flower comes a flower. So I guess that's the kind of order he's talking about. While you're thinking, Suhail, please go ahead, and then after a moment you can speak.
At least I don't know if I understood the question being asked, but to me, it is completely irrelevant no matter how long something lives and then dies. The fact that as the verse says, so look to the signs of God's mercy, how he raises to life the earth after its death. Just the very fact that life is given after something's death or the earth's death after a winter, that's enough as a sign of God's mercy. No matter how long that life lasts, is totally moot. It doesn't. That's not really a question. So a microbe can live for a second, but the very fact it was given the consciousness of life so that it can know, or not know, but glorify its maker with its qualities, point to its names, as he says in the last flash. That in and of itself is enough because it demonstrates his power to raise the dead to life, and that, as the verse says, for he is powerful over all things. That is sufficient. So it doesn't matter how long one lives before one dies, because man or nothing else in the universe lives for its own sake. They're not the one giving themselves life to begin with, so how are they justified in saying how long they should live? They live only because he is powerful over giving life to death as a means to demonstrate his all-powerful or his power over all things, or as he says, a stamp of unity upon all things at once. And the question about order is that the fact that things come into existence, as he says, with ease, speed, and such a vast scope, and in a particular order in two respects. One, the order in which things are always changing, and then the underlying order in which things come into existence. For example, as Berkan was saying, from a tree you get a tree, and specifically from an apple tree you get an apple tree. And from the sun from the star you get heat. Now that order could be changing specifically in the sense that maybe the sun doesn't give out the same intensity of heat it always does, but the underlying principle that the sun gives heat manifests in innumerable ways, or that an apple tree produces innumerable different types of apples. No one apple is the same. And it does so, and he does so with such ease on such a vast scale. So that in and of itself demonstrates a stamp of unity, because at once he's able to do all these things and demonstrate all his qualities at once to the degree that those things can demonstrate them. So an apple demonstrates his names differently than a man will demonstrate his names. So that's what I understand from order in those two respects. And then the other thing I took away, at least from the last paragraph, is that when he's giving the, well, I don't think we may have read this, but in any case, when he's giving the grape example, you know, how it's hanging on a vine that's only 2 fingers thick in the face of the sun with provided little moisture. What I think he's trying to say is that it really boggles the mind how anything is given existence to begin with. So grapes, which, you know, are moist or have a lot of water in them and are sweet, they come from a grapevine, which has really no quality like that at all, and are having the sun shine down on them and are protected from that and given existence for man to benefit from, or insects or animals to benefit from. The grapes can't do that. Nothing can. So, and he says he must surely be powerful over all things, because the one who does that must have power, therefore, for all things. If he can take care of just one grape in the vast expanse of the cosmos, just one grape, or a bunch of grapes on a grapevine, then he has to be powerful over all things.
Jazakallah khair. So Abdurrahman, it's your turn.
No, I think you answered it. It's
I answered?
yeah.
I didn't say anything.
No, you said how there's all this life and they live together while still being distinct. They don't just like become a soup, I guess. They still retain their own attributes and like differentiations, and that's a mistake. Would I guess be, at least defined within the paragraph as a mistake, would be if it became like a soup, which it doesn't.
Comments? Questions?
I don't understand a grapevine example though. Suhail was talking about it.
Great one example.
Grapevine.
Wine, okay. So he looks at the, I guess, the root of where all these branches comes, and then he counts how many branches are there. And then he says, I don't know, 100 and something, 155 branches. And in each branch, he counted hundreds of grapes. And then he says, all that many grapes, you should take them as, the bowls of, what it says?
Honeyed water.
Honeyed water. You see the contrast between all these dry branches and then honeyed water. And within this contrast, he says that there's a seal of the one who does this, the all-powerful one.
Generally, when we conclude about the all-powerful one, we don't do it off the physical. Like, we don't say, there's not enough water that this plant can give to these grapes, so now I conclude there must be an all-powerful one that's giving water to these grapes. This is a physical conclusion that science can look and observe in a different way and say, it's happening this way. It's more like the qualities we would say are definitely not there. But then here it's more like a physical argument. That's what it looks like to me.
Yes, it looks like, he says, however, it only occasionally obtains a little moisture. So he asks, where does this water come from, right? That's what he asked, as you were saying.
So there was an emphasis of consciousness, which attracts my attention here. So, as if he says, if you have this sort of like awareness of what's going on around you, you will then realize that if it's not a matter of measuring this much of water here, this much of water there, as you were saying, it's a matter of contrast in here. It doesn't make sense. You wouldn't expect to see such a bowl of honeyed water from this dry branch within this dry earth. I mean, yeah, at some point, let's say somebody poured water to this earth 2 months ago, I mean, during the springtime, let's say, but at the summertime, the grapes are coming out. So it sounds really awkward and interesting to say that why? What's happening? How did this end up being like this? And in a very interesting way of coming through this dry branch, from dry earth. Because the water was here, okay, but it was 2 months ago, not now. So there's this something going on in here. So what does this tell me? There must be something beyond this dry branch, dry earth. So this, I guess, the emphasis of consciousness in here is it speaks, in me there is something which shouts out, saying that just you cannot simply close your eyes and keep eating the grape without thinking about this. There's something extraordinary going on in here. Because a few days ago I was just eating grape, and the back side of each grape, when you detach it from its branch, there is like symmetrical or balanced way distributed 5 niches. So the connection between this grape, so when you detach it, you see that there are 5 niches in there, and they are equally distributed with equal angles, like 5 equally distributed angles. It's just nobody is almost paying attention to here, but its maker pays so much attention in there. I mean, it might have happened that there's no such niches over there, or they were just randomly distributed. No, they are perfectly aligned with equal angles. So it tells that whoever put this, a conscious being must have done this. Otherwise, if it was random, if it was by chance wouldn't be always equal angles. So I guess this sort of a questioning needs to come into being. So what is being taken into account when making the grape as it is? So am I looking at it and paying attention to it?
Oh, Suhail, please go ahead.
I just have an issue with what was said earlier about, how this is a physical explanation. It's all physical. Every conclusion I make has to do with what's out there in the world or what I'm experiencing. And Noor's using the grape example, kind of what Yusuf was saying. And I don't want to get too technical on science, but there's absolutely no reason for the grape to even exist. Like, what reason does a grape have to exist in the face of such harsh conditions? There's no reason, but it does. Coming from a dry grapevine, being planted in soil, being beat down by the heat of the sun. I mean, how does it, you can't explain its existence from within itself. It has no power to speak of. Or if you want to speak on a broad scale, I mean, for those who know physics, there's no reason, I mean, Yusuf kind of alluded to it, there's no reason for anything to exist in a low entropy state in the universe. There's absolutely no reason. Low entropy in and of itself means there's order. In a sense, or things are consciously have been put in a certain place by an external agent. How else do things exist in a state when they shouldn't be in that state to begin with? That's what Norsi is saying. Like, using a simple example as a grape. If you think about it, how just the fact that there's just one grape exists. Forget about even how many there are, just one. The conditions for in which that grape exists is beyond the grape itself. Like, it can't account for all those conditions from within its own existence. It has no power whatsoever. So how does it account for the fact that it needs water protected from the heat of the sun in the right condition to grow? and with limited resources, the grape can't do any of it. So for anything to exist, one grape, one leaf, one cell, you can't explain it from within itself. Not at all possible. Otherwise, you're just talking about chaos then and randomness, but no such thing exists. So you can't explain the orderliness of the universe or how things exist when they really shouldn't exist from within themselves.
No problem. You convinced?
I need to think about it.
So, why were you upset when you take it as a physical argument? Let's assume he's saying...
No, because I could say, no, there is enough water that is being given through the plant to the grapes, which there is. It's not like if I observed with science that you wouldn't see that water being moving through the plant. You would see that water.
Sorry to cut you off. You're saying there's enough water because that's what you observe. How do you know what enough water is? You just say what enough water is because that's the association with the grape's existence. How do you... Enough water is actually little water. I could say it's little water or a lot of water. There's no such thing as enough water. That's just how the order is what you observe. You're just making observations and saying, if there's an X amount of moisture, the grape exists. But you can't ignore the fact that the grape exists with a particular amount of moisture in the setting of all these other conditions. There's nothing in the amount of water that it is provided that necessitates a grape's existence whatsoever. Nothing whatsoever in how much water is there to necessitate a grape's existence. The grape exists not only because there's moisture, but it hangs on a grapevine. Like, all the conditions need to be met for one grape to exist. How do you explain all those conditions being met for one grape's existence? It can't be explained from within the grape itself. There's nothing from those conditions around it, the vine, the moisture, the sun, the soil, that says they wake up one day and they say the grape should exist. There's nothing in them. They could care less about one grape. That's Nursi's point.
I agree. However, I feel like this text isn't just diving to the existential aspect of it at the same time. If I did dig into it and go to the grape's existence and then look at it in the whole perspective of the universe, sure, what is enough water? But then in the text itself, Nursi is saying it seems as if they were just taps, it would only just be enough for the bunches. So in some way, it does seem like he has a different argument here. And I agree with what you said, but if you're asking why I didn't like the physical side of it, it's because the physical side is not, it's not diving into the existential part of it. It's more looking at there isn't enough water being given, and it must have, the sun. How is the sun giving off this much heat? It must has a source, like an absolute source. But then the scientists would come and say, there's this hydrogen and stuff, or there is a source.
There's nothing surprising there.
Like, it's not like out of the void something is happening that's not part of the order. It is following the order. It's not like it exists outside of the order. That's the part with the physical, trying to approach with the physical that I'm not understanding.
Well, that's my point. Nursi's asking, how do you explain the order? Like, you can take the order for granted, but you have to actually explain the order's existence. Like, what he's saying is like something magical is happening. The fact that you have a grape within this order, like, how does the order even know to exert any sort of will to have one grape exist? It doesn't make any sense. Like, the order doesn't know anything, doesn't have any power. And I observe order, definitely. I can write something down and say how is the grape existing? How much heat does the sun give? But that in and of itself doesn't explain that the fact that there is heat. How is it that within this order there is anything even taking place? It doesn't make any sense. You can't explain the existence of a grape from its orderliness within itself. It doesn't, there's nothing in the order of a grape's existence that in and of itself explains the grape's existence.
I agree.
How do you agree?
I mean, if we look from an existential point, I agree, but I don't have a disagreement with what he said.
Okay. But you are saying that it's kind of irrelevant to the paragraph, maybe.
I think the paragraph, for me, it seems to approach it from a different way too, though. But generally, we also read very deep into his text and don't look at what the words are saying, so maybe that is what it is.
But maybe it is a mistake as well. Like not looking at what words are saying. Because, so if we follow this logic, then we would say, oh yeah, there is nothing, surprising about the amount of water. Like in the grapes, we will see that amount of water, and if you follow the branches, you will see the exact amount of water is coming to the branches.
Yeah.
I mean, if this is the case. And we would say, oh, therefore there is nothing surprising there, right?
Yeah.
But Nursi says, to me at least, no, there is something surprising there. So I agree with you that, in a sense, he doesn't go to questioning, how a grape exists just as a, particle. Like, in that sense, there wouldn't be any difference between asking how a particle exists versus how a grape exists. But I guess in the text, he make a distinction. He says, on top of this particle, there's something else I'm observing there, and it's very surprising, he says. There's a contrast. This contrast takes me somewhere, and the way it takes me makes me find my creator. That's the way I read the paragraph.
So, if we again, I will take you back to the very beginning, the first word, when he talks about the same thing for leaves. He says the leaves are staying green for the entire summer in front of extreme heat, and they do not burn. Because if you were outside in that extreme heat, you would become first purple, then become black, whatever, but the leaf is green throughout the summer. And he says as if a leaf is slapping the face of materialists, saying that the heat, even the heat which you, highly regard, cannot really do anything to me. But if you look at it from, again, a scientific point of view, we would say that, well, the leaf is manufactured in a way to minimize the surface, maximize whatever, and we will use some technical terms like this. I would say, well, the water cannot escape. And even whatever the photosynthesis is happening, the temperature is being dropped, whatever. This is why the leaf is surviving green throughout the summer. Explained. Nothing miraculous in here. So, but the thing where the very thing itself is miracle. I guess the order. How does the order happen to be in there, or how does this grape coming into this example? I guess this is what we should be questioning in terms of input versus output. If it's equal, then we are done. Instead of this, in terms of the magnitude of matter, like water in, water out, not like that. But instead we should be saying in which conditions this water is being preserved in this entity, grape wine. Like in the environment is very much against it. The extreme heat and everywhere is dry, but still somehow this creature over there, this thing over there, is able to preserve the water, not only the water, in a sugary way. And it happens through a wine which itself is dry. So as if, if it was like, if it was coming from something watery, you would say, yeah, its source is water, but the source is a dry wine, but the thing itself is watery. So there is a very intentional, deliberate design choice is being made. It's not was done. It is being made. A deliberate choice is being made, is being carried out, And this is what he is attracting our attention to. It's not by chance, it's not random. There is a deliberate choice. So the one that does this, the one that makes this choice, that manifests the knowledge and power, must have power over all things. Because this is, if you would call something miracle, this is a miracle. I guess this is what attracting our attention to. Otherwise, we just describing what's going on doesn't explain or doesn't make it any more easily graspable. Still, it's a very extraordinary thing that's taking place in front of our eyes. And if you remember with the example again in the first verse, the other example was the rootlets exploding the rocks, right? So if we say that, yeah, it's another acid and the rock and acid, whatever, and then it explodes, and then the rootlet sends out some acid and then it explodes the rock. Yeah, everything is explained. It's not working like this, because you would say in multiple levels, the rootlet needs to know what rock likes, what it dislikes, or then you go to the acid itself. Acid is something like watery, but it's able to damage something as hard as rock. How does this interaction work? So in whatever level you take it, you will see some conscious choice being made, a knowledge manifesting, a power manifesting itself. And this is the thing that makes us question, how does this happen?
I guess the key word there is mercy. He says, Sharbe, yeah, anyway. Syrup of mercy. So the way we define, the way we understand mercy, it's all about the contrasts, right? Rich helping poor, the powerful helping weak, or the one who can give love, giving his or her love to one who needs. So this is the way we see mercy. This is the way we understand mercy, at least from one aspect. And he says, when you look at the grapes, you will see the same thing. Dry branch, the grapes, and the grapes are somehow provided with honeyed water. So when you look at there, you will see mercy. I guess that's the point. And the beauty of this contrast, the beauty of the emphasis on there is no water that I see, is that it's a training for you, because in life you will find yourself in a situation where you wouldn't see water, only a little moisture, but you will need it. You will need the honeyed water, but you won't see any water, the source of water around you. What are you going to do? You either go crazy, depressed, there's no way to you being successful, you being, I don't know, whatever you need, or you say, this is just another grapevine of my life. The dry branches, grapes, now my situation, dry branches, and I need grape, and he will give me grape. Or he may give me grape. The hope, right? It's all about the hope process, the fear and hope. So grape wine gives you the hope for your life. When you have to go somewhere you don't want to be, because of some, I don't know, the environmental reasons, it's not the place that you can flourish. But then he says, the authors, he says, haven't you seen any grapevine? Like, don't you see that these grapes are made when you don't see water? He will bring water. Just like, you were saying that. But if I look, deep enough, I will see the water. He says, yes, of course there's water somewhere. He's bringing the water, just like he will bring water when you need it. Whether you are on top of a mountain, whether you are under the ground, or you're facing the sun, he will bring the water. He's the all-powerful one. Just like he brought water to grapes, he can bring water to you. Just like he can keep leaves out of heat by inventing or making up some mechanisms inside them, he will make some mechanisms inside you as well. And then you will be free of the heat.
So I guess if we were living like in a tropical environment, and while walking in the woods, if we see that water is flowing from somewhere, we wouldn't be astonished too much. We would say, well, everywhere is filled with water, so just another water. But if we were in a desert and if we see that a fountain is made somewhere, it will attract our attention at least. How did this end up being in here? Because we wouldn't expect water to be in this place. So grapes is such an example in this case because as if the creator put it in a certain environment saying that, look, there is something specific going on in here. I want you to pay attention to hear what's going on in here. So and this aspect, I guess, author is attracting our attention to. So for instance, in a high quality university, you can expect to get high quality publications because you say that, okay, there are 100 top researchers are working in here, and 10% high quality thing coming out of in here is no surprise. But if you are in a, let's say, developing country, low budgets and everything, and if a good quality work comes out of there, you say there's something extra going on in here. Because in the first case, there are a lot of sources and, well, a little bit of or decent outcome. In the other one, no input, almost no input, like very limited input. And you see that it's very efficiently turned into an output. So you say there's something carefully going on in here. And this is what's happening in this example of grape.
And actually, I guess it's attracting our attention to the fact that in everywhere you will see same kind of contrasts. Mm-hmm. Even in your example of this tropical environment, you will see the same contrast there if you look at them. Because until he points out this fact, I'm sure you, not as a Dr. Roman, but anyone, you were not aware of this contrast. Because you were just, oh yeah, for another wine, just let me get some grapes and eat. But he says, just look at it. Dry branches, fruits, grapes. And again, this is a really important training for your life, for your sanity in life. Because in life you will end up with dry branches every time. You constantly end up with dry branches. And then you constantly somehow get some grapes. Suhail waiting for a long time. Sorry, Suhail, please go ahead.
To Abdurrahman's point about being a physical description, I mean, to me, Nursi never talks about physical things except from an existential perspective, because you can't talk about physical things as meaning something unless you talk about their existence. And then you can only draw conclusions examining the existential aspect of things that you observe. It's just you can't separate the two. So to me, when he says, like, I thought if this vine was a tap from which flowed honeyed water and it produced water continuously, it would only just be enough for the bunches which in the face of this heat suckle those hundreds of little pumps of the sherbet of mercy. To me, he's imagining, so to speak, the sort of grapes and vine having power unto themselves. That's an existential question. Like he's asking, do they, like, thinking about this contrast, a dry branch and the honeyed water of grapes. Like, where is the power Like, can there be any sort of power within those things that this is taking place? A dry vine has the power to give water to grapes, and the grapes have any power over the vine to draw water from it. That's his point about taking things, the number of things in the universe as being creators. Like, to me, so he's talking about the existential aspect. In this stark contrast, who really has power here? The grape or the vine? Nothing, as he says. Like, what's happening is unimaginable. It's actually magical, so to speak. It doesn't matter to me how you describe it and what story you put to it. The fact that it's happening, the existence of it in this way, is magical. There's no way, and to me, this stark contrast is the point in how he creates to draw man to use his reason with such obvious examples. Like, when you, as you said, when you're presented a vine and something comes out of that, so to speak, almost dead vine, it shakes man's consciousness to ask, like, where's the power in these things? Otherwise, if things were just kind of homogeneous and didn't present this stark sort of contrast to me, the soil, which appears dead, is, you get life out of it. I wouldn't be asking any questions whatsoever, really. I wouldn't really be thinking about it. And that's what Nursi is doing. He's looking at the contrast, like this almost like contradiction taking place. And yet you get something out of this contradiction. Question is, can you explain the existence of any sort of power within that contradiction? This apparent contradiction, you can't.
Any final remarks, because we are out of time? Final points? So maybe just one thing to highlight. Again, the mercy, I guess, if we just stuck with the descriptions, then they're just descriptions. But if we go beyond the descriptions and try to see what it means to me, as we reach out the mercy, then it becomes a guidance for me. So then I can talk about the book of creation, book of universe. Because I read it and it means something to me. Otherwise, just saying that there are 3 letter A, 5 letter L, and whatever, just describing it. It's not a reading. Who cares whether there's a dry branch, there's a grape, there's such a formula between them, and so on, unless it points out the mercy that I need.
And the verse was attracting our attention to this, right? Look at the, what was it? Right there. So look to the signs of God's mercy, how he rises to life the earth after its death. So I guess in general, in this 6th flash, so author started with looking at the species and the individuals in the species. Then he talked about how orderly things are bringing into being. And he said that this things bringing into being with resurrection is the order that you observe. It's the biggest manifestation that you observe every spring. And then he emphasized the order and wisdom and everything in there. And at the end, he gave us an example of practically what he's meaning by that. He says it is resurrection of a grapevine is in the summertime you get the grapes, because in the after the winter it was just a dry grapevine. But now in the spring and summertime you start getting these grapes. So this is the resurrection. And don't you observe that this is a mercy is being manifested in there. It is beyond the environment that the environment cannot give it to you. The dry wine itself cannot give it to you. So there's a clear manifestation of mercy. And then ties it back saying that this one is going to resurrect you as well. Because he resurrected the grapevine and he keeps showing it to you. So he will resurrect.
And that's the whole point, like he will resurrect you. I guess we are most of the time so stuck with these proof aspects of things that we lose the sense of connection with the reality, with the creation and the creator. Like, for instance, when we talk about the all-powerful one, as if, we just count the number of powers and say that the creator is that powerful, and you prove something. But at the end, like, to be honest to yourself, who cares? And who cares whether he's all-powerful or not? Unless you need something which needs such a power. So when you say, therefore, you come with these arguments, as Musi comes with. We see in the springtime this and then that and then that, therefore he's the all-powerful. And you say, do you know what? My need requires such a powerful one. So you celebrate your conclusion. You say, he's the all-powerful one. You say, Alhamdulillah, that he's all-powerful one. Because only the all-powerful one can resurrect me. Because only the all-powerful one can make me successful. So, again, like, going beyond just mathematics of the things. There is such a water, such amount of water, therefore that amount of water, and so on. Rather, when we see the mercy there, dry branch, great, then you can use it, and it becomes your guidance. Mercy is your guidance, not the amount of water. Who cares, like, how many water molecules are traversing?
And I guess, again, maybe we should underline the word consciousness here. Because sometimes mercy is, as somebody would call, a very subjective thing to call it. I mean, what do you mean that it's a manifestation of mercy in a grade? Because when we talk about, let's say, scientific things, we are talking about input and output. So 2 gram input, 2 gram output, sort of a thing. So, but in here, the author is talking to my consciousness as well, saying that if you have an iota of consciousness, and it's not reducing me only to input-output mathematics of input and output, saying that the input-output is not only consisting of matter, which your intellect would like to consider exclusively, but there's this other aspects that you are aware of, that you can sense, which is the verse in here is inviting us to consider the manifestations of mercy. So if you have this aspect, then you will consider it. But although you have it, don't pretend as if you don't have it. And I guess in the academia, for the sake of, I don't know, whatever, we are avoiding this because it is something doomed, or it sounds like it is ridiculed so much maybe that we deny that this is mercy manifesting over there. I mean, once we were having a conversation with a high school student recently, was saying that if a boy gives a rose to a girl, and if the girl gets the rose and starts eating it, what would you say? Like, but isn't this how we are behaving when it comes to seeing a grape? A grape is being given to me, and I simply consume it, saying that 2 gram input, 2 gram output, everything is explained. Like, there's no, as if I am looking at it like a robot, as if I have no consciousness at all. So I guess that this, because author is, I guess, getting the idea of consciousness from this verse, since he's putting it in there. So look at the signs of God's mercy. So when we talk about mercy, it's speaking to my consciousness. Don't you sense mercy in there? سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وآخر دعواهم أن الحمد لله رب العالمين الفاتحة.